So, welcome. You're listening to a deep dive into the ancient archive blueprints, specifically their discussion series called Deep Dives, Decoding the Pillars of History. And today, we are looking at this massive stack of historical notes, academic papers, and translated primary texts you sent us to build this out.
Welcome to the debate. You know, when you twist the cap off a jar of everyday moisturizing cold cream, there is this profound illusion of simplicity. You look inside, and what you see is a perfectly smooth, white, homogeneous paste. It looks completely uniform. It looks, well, completely calm.
Right, but if you zoom into a microscopic level, you are actually looking at a volatile, chaotic battleground between water and oil. Two ingredients that, quite frankly, fundamentally despise each other.
Exactly. You are looking at a literal war zone held in this delicate, forced state of suspension. And forcing those warring elements into a stable peace treaty is a technique invented roughly 2,000 years ago by Galen of Pergamos.
The personal physician to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
The very same. He created Ceratum Galeni, which was a topical emulsion originally designed to treat the mangled flesh of Roman gladiators.
But the central question we are exploring today is about the legacy of that exact cream. Like, does modern pharmaceutical science fundamentally rely on Galen's original formulation principles? Or is the modern use of his emulsion merely a mechanical holdover decoupled from his actual scientific theories?
Right. And I'll be arguing that modern pharmacy is a direct, unbroken continuation of Galen's work, because the physical science of processing and stabilizing raw ingredients, what we literally call galenical formulation, remains the absolute unbroken bedrock of the industry today.
And I will be arguing that because modern medicine entirely threw out Galen's foundational medical theory, the four humors, contemporary science is merely utilizing a mechanical script entirely stripped of his actual conceptual formulation principles.
So let's crack this open. From my perspective, when we look at Galen, we aren't just looking at some neat piece of historical trivia. We are looking at a man practicing highly sophisticated material science that directly birthed modern pharmacy.
Oh, I think birthed is a strong word there.
But we have undeniable evidence. Modern therapeutic emulsions and cold creams share the exact molecular structure that was whipped together by Galen nearly 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about galenical formulation, the physical science of compounding raw ingredients into stable, deliverable medications.
Right, the mechanics of it.
The core principles of creating an emulsion, overcoming that natural repulsion between oil and water through high-speed mechanical agitation, they remain exactly as he designed them. That physical architecture is explicitly the bedrock of the global pharmaceutical industry today.
I come at it from a different way. True reliance on original formulation principles requires a continuity of the underlying scientific theory, not just, copying a physical mixing technique.
I mean, a technique is a principle if it works.
But look at why he did it. Galen viewed the human body as a closed-loop system governed by four primary humors, right? Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And if you're listening and thinking, wow, four humors sounds like medieval witchcraft, not modern science, you're exactly right.
Well, it was the prevailing science of the time.
Sure, but he genuinely believes systemic disease happened when these fluids fell out of balance. He built his formulations specifically to correct those systemic imbalances. So since modern medicine has completely and rightfully discarded humoral theory, a contemporary lab technician blending an emollient is merely repeating a mechanical action. They kept the recipe, sure, but they entirely stripped it of Galen's original medical principles.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective by pulling us right into the heart of the Roman imperial palace to see how this actually went down.
Okay, let's go to Rome.
Picture Galen's workbench. This isn't just like a basic mortar and pestle setup. On his wooden workbench sits this dynamic array of pounded willow bark, wild chamomile, and pressed rose oil. To a passing Roman soldier, it probably looked like magic potions.
Probably smelled like it too.
Definitely. But to Galen, this was a precision testing ground for fluid dynamics.
Well, it was a testing ground, definitely, but the parameters of his test were entirely dictated by that humoral theory I just mentioned.
Wait, hold on. I think you're artificially separating the engineering from the science there. Let's look at the physical problem he was actually tasked with solving first. He was the chief physician to the gladiators in Pergamum before he moved to Rome, right?
Right.
Gladiators were massive investments. These were elite athletes suffering from massive, traumatic, highly infected wounds on a daily basis. And the standard medical protocol back then was just slapping on heavy oil-based salves.
Which is a terrible, terrible idea for an infected wound.
Exactly. And Galen noticed, through pure observation, mind you, that those oil salves trapped heat inside the infected flesh. Oil is occlusive, meaning it creates a physical, waterproof barrier on the skin.
Yeah, it's like putting a thick winter coat over a raging fever.
Precisely, and the heat from the infection caused those raw animal fats to quickly go rancid, which just fed the bacteria and made the infection so much worse. So Galen deliberately turns to material science. He takes molten beeswax, infuses it with olive oil, and systematically whips it with pure water. That is a massive conceptual leap.
It's a massive leap because water and oil are immiscible. Left to their own devices, they will always separate. They are basically like magnets pushing apart from each other.
Right. So his assistants had to mix this concoction with high-speed mechanical agitation. They beat it continuously until the microscopic water droplets became suspended within the wax and oil matrix. That is a masterclass in physical chemistry.
It's impressive, yes.
He had to figure out how to force oil and water to hold hands. And to do that, he used the beeswax as a rudimentary emulsifier. For the listeners out there wondering what an emulsifier actually does, think of it as a molecular bridge. One end of the beeswax molecule is attracted to oil, the other end is attracted to water. It physically grabs onto both and forces them into a truce. That principle, overcoming molecular repulsion to create a stable delivery mechanism, is the exact same foundation we use today.
I don't deny the physical mechanics are similar.
It's like foundational open source software code, you know? The original developer 2,000 years ago might have had a completely outdated philosophy about what computers should be used for, but if the core architecture they wrote is still running the modern system inherently relies on those original principles.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the architecture in this case was basically a happy accident born out of a flawed theory? Galen didn't combine these elements because he made a conscious leap into modern molecular science. He did it to balance the humors.
But the physical mechanics?
Let me finish this thought because the context really matters here. If you look at an infected gladiator's wound, it's red, it's swollen, and it's radiating heat. Under humoral theory, that indicated a severe excess of yellow bile and blood.
Right, a state of unnatural heat and dryness.
Exactly. So to counteract this, Galen believed he needed a treatment that was conceptually cold and moist. Water provides the moisture, sure, but water alone just runs right off the skin. He needed a vehicle to hold that moisture against the skin to counteract the yellow bile.
Right, but his intent doesn't negate the physical principle he successfully established.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. A scientific principle is a fundamental truth that serves as the foundation for a belief system. Galen's principle was literally opposite humors cure each other.
But
the mechanical whipping of water, beeswax, and olive oil was practically a happy accident in service of restoring humoral balance. He wasn't thinking about molecular bridges or fluid dynamics. We cannot retroactively assign modern pharmaceutical brilliance to a physician who was just trying to cool down imaginary yellow bile.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are demanding that a pioneer fully understand the future implications of their discovery for it to be considered a principle.
I'm demanding they understand the science of what they are doing.
But science is fundamentally about observation and iteration. Galen observed that oil trapped heat and went rancid. That is a material, physical observation. He hypothesized that trapping water and wax would solve this. He then engineered a method to achieve it.
Through trial and error.
Yes, which is how science works. The fact that his overarching biological framework, to humors, was flawed doesn't invalidate the chemical principles he explicitly formalized. Let's actually look at the mechanism of action. When you apply Ceratum Galeni to scorched or irritated skin, how does it actually work?
Oh, it works brilliantly. I will certainly concede that. It relies on the thermodynamics of evaporation.
When this emulsion hits the skin, the heat of the human body transfers to those trapped water droplets.
Right.
And as those microscopic droplets of pure water rapidly evaporate, they draw thermal energy away from the tissue. This induces a sudden, significant drop in surface temperature.
Which feels amazing on a red-hot, inflamed gladiator wound.
Right. It provides immediate relief.
And what you're describing is the latent heat of vaporization. It's the exact same reason sweating cools you down. The water needs energy to turn from a liquid into a gas, so it steals that heat energy directly from your skin.
Yes, and while the water evaporates, the molten beeswax infused with olive oil remains behind on the surface of the skin. That acts as the occlusive barrier we mentioned earlier, effectively sealing out airborne dirt and bacteria from the arena floor. It is a highly effective dual-action physical design.
Which is precisely why I argue it's a formulation principle that forms our modern bedrock.
But notice how you and I are describing it right now. We are using terms like latent heat of vaporization and occlusive barrier. Galen meticulously recorded this formula in his Greek journals, and it became an open-source medical blueprint that outlived the Roman Empire itself.
Unbroken continuity.
But when medieval apothecaries across Europe and the Islamic world, brilliant scholars, by the way, like Avicenna, translated his texts, they adopted the emulsion as an indispensable clinical standard because it worked, physically, not because the humoral science was sound.
They still used it.
They saw it cooled burns effectively. It was preserved as a practical recipe for dermatological crises. And a recipe is not a scientific doctrine.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Because in the practical realm of pharmacology, the physical recipe is the scientific doctrine.
Oh, come on.
Seriously. The very definition of pharmaceutical compounding is the art and science of preparing personalized medications, the act of stabilizing ingredients that naturally repel each other via high-speed mechanical agitation isn't just a simple baking recipe. It is a foundational technology.
It's a technique.
You cannot have a modern targeted topical cream without a stable base. Galen systematically developed a method to keep active botanical ingredients like the willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin, suspended in a stable matrix so they wouldn't degrade. That preservation, that stabilization is the core principle of galenical formulation.
But galenical formulation today refers to the mechanical process, not the scientific rationale. Yes, the physical structure survived. But think of it this way. If I bake a cake using a recipe from the 1800s, I am not relying on 19th century nutritional science. I am just mixing flour and eggs.
The survival of an artifact doesn't mean the survival of the principles that created it. I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what constitutes the bedrock of modern pharmacy. If you walk into any modern hospital or pharmacy today, and you pick up a jar of cold cream or a therapeutic topical emulsion, you are holding the exact molecular structure whipped together by Galen.
Physically, yes.
Written by the imperial doctor in the heart of ancient Rome. They are balancing the oil phase and the water phase. They are using emulsifying agents. They are applying mechanical shear force.
Right, but
This isn't just a superficial resemblance. The physical constraints of reality dictate that if you want to deliver a water-soluble active ingredient and an oil-soluble active ingredient into the human skin simultaneously, you must use Galen's architecture. The continuity is unbroken.
I don't disagree that the mechanical script is unbroken. The physical actions of the contemporary lab technician absolutely parallel the physical actions of Galen's assistants furiously whipping olive oil and water.
Thank you.
But running a mechanical script is entirely different from relying on formulation principles. Modern technicians understand the actual molecular behavior of emulsions. We aren't just whipping things and hoping for the best. We measure zeta potential.
Which is what exactly for our listeners?
Zeta potential is essentially checking the electrical charge of the microscopic droplets. We want to make sure they carry a strong enough charge to repel each other and not clump together, which, by the way, ensures the emulsion survives a 5-year shelf life. Galen's cream was incredibly unstable. It would separate after a few weeks.
Well, he didn't have modern preservatives.
Modern pharmacists also understand lipid bilayers. The human skin's outer layer is made of lipids, which are fats. Fats naturally repel water. So if you want a water-based medicine to enter the skin, you need an oil-based vehicle to smuggle it through that fat layer, almost like a Trojan horse.
Which is exactly what Galen's emulsion does.
But we choose our ingredients based on peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical trials and pharmacokinetic profiling, meaning we track exactly how a drug moves through the cellular structures of the body over time. We aren't doing it to balance humors.
But they are still building the modern house on Galen's foundation.
They are using Galen's bricks, perhaps, but the architectural principles are entirely different. We really have to separate the physical artifact, the cold cream, from the discarded medical philosophy.
I just don't think you can separate them so cleanly.
When a modern pharmacist creates a topical emulsion, they're doing so to deliver, say, hydrocortisone, to suppress an immune response at the cellular level. Galen was trying to pull excess yellow bile out of a system. To claim that modern pharmacy fundamentally relies on Galen's original principles is to conflate a successful physical technique with scientific theory. We rely on modern chemistry. We just happen to use a physical tool that Galen invented for entirely different reasons.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, again, was Newton's formulation of gravity not a foundational scientific principle just because he didn't understand general relativity or the curvature of space-time?
That is entirely different.
Is it? Galen created a stable, biphasic delivery system. He documented the ratios, the need for agitation, and the therapeutic applications for the skin. The fact that we now know why the chamomile reduced inflammation because it contains a compound called apigenin rather than because it cooled the humors, that doesn't erase the principle of his delivery system.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the stark difference in how the knowledge was generated?
How so?
Newton's mathematical descriptions of gravity held true and were empirically predictive, even if they were incomplete. Galen's underlying theory was entirely predictive of nothing. It was a completely false model. The humors do not exist.
Okay, true.
Therefore, the formulation principles derived from that model, the idea that you must mix these specific things to alter the humors, are void. The only thing that survived was the physical artifact of the emulsion itself, preserved by trial and error through the Middle Ages. The Islamic scholars preserved it because they saw the clinical results on burns, not because the humoral math added up to modern standards.
But isn't clinical efficacy the ultimate empirical proof in medicine? He engineered a physical substance that worked so well it survived 2 millennia of medical paradigm shifts.
As a recipe.
You say we kept the recipe and abandoned the science. I argue that in the practical, applied field of pharmacy, the recipe is the applied science. Galenical formulation is literally defined as the physical science of processing, stabilizing, and compounding raw ingredients into safe, deliverable medications.
Right.
It is the very name of the discipline. Galen's principles of extraction, suspension, and stabilization are the exact same principles we use today. We just use homogenized mechanical mixers instead of human assistants with whisks.
We use homogenized mechanical mixers, yes, but we also use highly advanced synthetic surfactants. Like I mentioned with the zeta potential, we engineer these mixtures at a microscopic electrical level. Galen's emulsion had to be made fresh constantly, because without modern emulsifiers, the oil and water would eventually separate back out.
To me, that just proves my point. We spent the last 2,000 years optimizing his principle. We didn't discard it, we refined it. We found better ways to keep the water and oil from separating, but the fundamental principle of forcing them together to create a cooling, occlusive delivery vehicle remains unchanged. It is still the absolute gold standard for dermatological treatment.
I come at it from a different way. Refining a physical tool is not the same as validating an ancient scientific principle. If ancient humans realized that a heavy rock could crush a nut, and today we use a highly engineered hydraulic steel press to crush a nut, we aren't relying on the original scientific principles of the caveman. We are just applying force to a shell.
A bit reductive, don't you think?
Not at all. Galen realized oil and water together felt good on a wound. It was a brilliant, monumental achievement in the history of medicine. But modern pharmacy relies on the principles of molecular biology and organic chemistry. Galen's emulsion is a mechanical holdover. It's a really useful physical trick that we retrofitted with actual science.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently, because calling it just a mechanical holdover or a physical trick drastically understates the sophistication required to conceptualize and execute a stable emulsion in antiquity.
I'm not denying his genius.
He didn't just smash a rock against a nut, though. He identified a complex material failure, oil-trapping heat, and devised a multi-step chemical engineering solution. He utilized beeswax not just as an occlusive, but as a rudimentary emulsifier to lower the surface tension between the water and the olive oil.
Right.
He might not have used the term surface tension, but his process explicitly manipulated it. That is a scientific principle in action, regardless of the humoral vocabulary he used to describe it.
We can certainly marvel at his ingenuity, I'll give you that. The transition from crude, rotting animal fats to a sophisticated cooling emulsion was an absolute paradigm shift in patient care. The sheer relief it must have provided to a gladiator suffering from severe lacerations is hard to overstate. It fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of topical medicine.
And that brings us to where we stand today, bridging the gap between those damp, heated workshops of ancient Rome and the highly sterile, processed laboratories of modern pharmacology. From my perspective, the evidence shows that the physical science of compounding and stabilizing deliverable medications is an enduring, foundational principle. The fact that the physical architecture of Galen's cold cream remains the standard delivery mechanism for dermatological care today proves that his original formulation principles remain the unbroken bedrock of the pharmaceutical industry.
And while I readily acknowledge the monumental historical impact of Ceratum Galeni from treating the wounds of the Colosseum to becoming a staple for medieval apothecaries and modern hospitals, I maintain my position.
Naturally.
While the molecular structure of the emulsion undeniably survived, the foundational medical principles, the humoral theory that actually drove Galen's work, have been entirely discarded by modern science. Executing an ancient mechanical script, no matter how brilliantly designed, does not constitute an adherence to his original scientific philosophy. We rely on the physical artifact. We do not rely on his science.
Well, we have definitely found clear points of convergence regarding the sheer historical gravity of Galen's invention. I think we agree that the physical structure he engineered 2,000 years ago survived the collapse of empires and revolutionized clinical standards across continents.
Absolutely. The historical continuum of the artifact itself is not in question. Where we diverge, and will continue to respectfully disagree, is on the definition of a scientific principle itself. Is it the underlying theoretical framework that motivates the invention, or is it the physical mechanics of the invention itself?
It is a fascinating tension between theoretical science and practical mechanics. There is clearly much more to explore in the historical material regarding how ancient innovations transition into modern standards.
Definitely.
But I want to leave everyone with this final thought. The next time you open your medicine cabinet and you twist the cap off a simple jar of cold cream or a therapeutic lotion, take a moment to look at that smooth white surface.
Yeah.
And consider that the simple act of applying it to your skin connects you directly to the damp heat of a Roman evening 2,000 years ago. It really makes you wonder how many other everyday items in our modern lives are just ancient remedies wearing a modern disguise.
A profound question to consider.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
Ancient people were master engineers. Subscribe to Ancient Archive Blueprints as we explore more master designs from the past.